Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see if we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Juvenile Instructor from the 1st of June 1900. We're continuing our Lives of Our Leaders series, and this one is called Lives of Our Leaders, the Apostles, John Henry Smith. Now, most people don't have any idea who this person is. I've never heard of him. So I will say I don't remember that many details about his life. But I do remember that he is the son of George A. Smith and the father of George Albert Smith, who I am assuming you have heard of. So, no, he's not directly related to Joseph Smith, but sort of indirectly. I think he was a second cousin. Anyways, so that's what I know off the top of my head. I thought that, I doubt that I can offer more detail than that. So let's go ahead and read the article, yeah? On their journey westward from Nauvoo, Illinois, the exiled saints formed temporary resting places on the Missouri River. A town built of log cabins, known as winter quarters, sprang up on the west bank, and a place which the saints named Canesville, now called Council Bluffs, was built on the east bank of the river. It was at Carbunca, near Canesville, where the subject of this sketch first saw the light. He was born on the 18th of September, 1848. His father, the late President George A. Smith, had accompanied President Brigham Young and the first company of pioneers to the Great Salt Lake Valley the year before, and with some of them had also returned a few weeks later to the Missouri River. Upon his arrival there, he proceeded to make preparations for the removal of his family to the newly found gathering place in the valleys of the West. But it was not until the summer of 1849 that George A. Smith and his family began their journey westward from the Missouri, and the child John Henry was just a little over a year old when he arrived with his parents in Salt Lake City. Less than 2 years after reaching the valley, on June 12, 1851, the boy's mother, Sarah Ann Libby, died of consumption. Aw, that's so sad. She had been an invalid for several years. Okay, consumption, if you're not aware, is usually tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a bacterial infection of the lungs, and it is very bad. It's very difficult to get rid of, even today. It is treatable with antibiotics, but back in those days there was no treatment. So it can often live in the body for years before it finally kills you. It's called consumption because it generally causes you to slowly lose weight, and you get very thin and you get very weak, and it looks like you're wasting away. And so, yeah, that's where the name comes from. But I had no idea that his mother died of tuberculosis. That's really sad. After her death, John Henry, who was her only child, was placed in the care of his mother's sister, Hannah Maria, who was also one of his father's wives. Yeah, that happened a lot back then. So, his aunt, yeah, at the age of 3, I believe. She had a son of her own, Charles Warren, only a few months younger than the other boy, and the two were raised together, almost like twins, right? And as they grew up, they became united by a most endearing brotherly affection. It is pleasing to note that time has not broken this attachment, though circumstances of late years have separated them more from each other's society than when they were boys. Well, that's cute. His half-brother, yeah? Well, half-brother and cousin, yes? Because his mothers were sisters. So, okay. The most public duties of the father kept him away from home much of the time. Besides, his family became widely separated a few years after their entrance into the valley. Some were left to reside in Salt Lake City, others were located in Parowan, while his wives Lucy and Hannah were, during the summer of 1852, removed to Provo, at which place the two brothers spent their early boyhood days. That's interesting. Why did he have his family split up like that? Huh. I'm not sure. Like, did he have a hard time, like, finding a place big enough for everybody? Because I don't think that was terribly common for polygamists to have their wives live in different locations. Though deprived of a mother's care at such a tender age, John Henry was not neglected. That's good. His aunt was as good and true a mother to him as one could be, and he received the same care and attention from her as did her own son. To her patient teaching and training and constant watch care and solicitude, he attributes to a great extent the success he has thus far attained in life. That's wonderful. In making this acknowledgment concerning his mother's potent influence over him for good, he but expresses the heart sentiment of many a man who has become noted for worthy deeds. In truth, it may be said that all really great and good men are largely indebted to their mothers for what they may have attained in true excellence. Okay. I don't think that's true at all, but hey, if you think so, maybe. There might be a correlation there. The boyhood of John Henry was spent in much the same way as that of other Utah lads of his time. One of his early occupations was that of herding cattle on the Provo bench and in the bottoms along the shore of the Utah Lake. Yeah, like Joseph F. Smith, yeah? Who, by the way, was his second cousin. Yeah. Second cousin? Third cousin. Second cousin. One of those. Anyways. He was a large and powerful boy for his age, and was always considered by other boys as a genial, good-natured companion, full of life and fun. For several years after the first settlement of Provo, the Indians of the vicinity were from time to time exceedingly troublesome, and though John Henry was but a youth at that period, he had some adventures with them. At one time he was shot by a redskin, that's horrible language, jeez, but escaped without injury. I apologize for the language, I didn't write it, but that's not very lovely to read. When he was in his 14th year, he came very near being drowned in the Provo River, but was saved in a miraculous manner. I feel like I've heard this story. The circumstance took place on June 8, 1862, when he was in company with Thomas and George M. Brown, attempted to cross that stream in a small boat. It was at a time when the water was very high and turbulent. The boat capsized in the stream, and John Henry became entangled in some driftwood, and remained under water for some time. Those standing on the shore who witnessed the mishap feared he was lost, owing to the length of time he remained beneath the water. Suddenly, however, by some unseen power, he was lifted onto the bank of the river and was rescued. It was subsequently learned that at the time when this accident happened, his father, who was then in Salt Lake City, had been so forcibly impressed that his son was in extreme danger that he prayed to the Lord to save the boy, and his prayer was answered in the remarkable way just mentioned. Interesting. I don't think I have heard that story, actually, but that's really interesting. How you would have this impression like you need to pray for somebody right now. Wow. As John Henry grew older, he spent most of his time in Salt Lake City, going to the capital to attend school. The educational facilities of the time were meager compared with what they are today, but his parents sought to give him all the education that could be acquired from the educational institutions then existing in the territory. As this sketch is written especially for the benefit of the youth, it may be profitable, before passing on from the consideration of his boyhood days, to mention some of the agencies that influenced the youthful mind and helped him to direct his course aright in life. When John Henry was but a child, his grandfather, John Smith, who was at that time patriarch of the church, gave him an inspired patriarchal blessing, in which his life was marked out. This has ever been to him a guide and an incentive to noble action. Another such incentive was a remark once made to him by Colonel Thomas L. Kane. When a young man, he called upon that distinguished gentleman, that ever true and staunch friend of the Latter-day Saints, and in the course of the interview, Colonel Kane said to him, in such an impressive way that he could not forget it, "Young man, I trust that you will ever remember that the best blood of the 19th century flows in your veins." Interesting. This was an appeal to his patriotism that had a lasting impression for good upon the young man. The idea conveyed in the expression that the founders of Utah were of the noblest and strongest characters of the century should awaken with all their children and grandchildren, as well as the youth of Zion generally, a determination to maintain and perpetuate the good name of their fathers. John Henry Smith entered the matrimonial state at what today would be considered an early age. At 18 he married Miss Sarah Farr, daughter of the Honorable Lauren Farr of Ogden, a highly estimable lady in every respect, who has ever proven a true and devoted helpmate to her husband. 10 years later he married again, taking to wife Josephine Grosbeck, a daughter of the late Elder Nicholas Grosbeck. It may be here stated that Elder Smith's married life has been one of continued happiness. It is not saying too much to add that his is indeed a model Christian home. Within it, peace, happiness, and love abound. Therein, the parents receive the honor, respect, and affection due their position, and the children are governed with tender consideration, gentleness, and patience. After their marriage, the youthful couple first made their home in Provo, where the husband was employed as a telegraph operator. While residing there, he was chosen as a counselor to Bishop W. A. Follett of the 4th Ward of that town. When the Transcontinental Railway was nearing completion, he left Provo and engaged with Messrs. Benson, Farr, and West, assisting them in the building of 200 miles of the Central Pacific Railway, for which they had taken a contract. Upon the completion of this labor, Governor Leland Stanford of California offered the young man a good position in Sacramento. This he did not accept, as his father desired him to return to Salt Lake City and labor with him, and he complied with his father's wish. Reminds me a tiny bit of Brigham Young Jr., who we read a little while back, who was more interested in obeying his father than he was in furthering his own career, yeah? Frequently accompanying his father in his travels throughout the territory, John Henry, as he is still familiarly called, became acquainted with many people, and especially with prominent men of the community. This privilege which he enjoyed afforded him an opportunity to acquire an education that is not to be obtained from books or in colleges. Being closely associated with men of great minds, such as Brigham Young and other church leaders, he would study their lives and discover for himself the secrets of their excellence of character, and adopt in his own life many of the traits observable in their conduct. That he profited by this association is evidenced by his own nobleness of mind and heart. That, personally, is actually my opinion as to why there are so many apostles, especially in history, that were related to each other. Because they got to observe firsthand what it takes to become an apostle, but from their relatives, and that influenced them to become like them, yeah? Anyway, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong, obviously, but that would make sense, wouldn't it? At the session of the Territorial Legislature of 1872, John Henry Smith was Assistant Clerk of the House of Representatives. He was also Assistant Clerk of the Constitutional Convention held that same year. In May 1874, he was called to fill a mission to Europe, being set apart for the purpose by Apostle John Taylor. Leaving for this mission on June 29th, he reached New York July 4th. Before embarking for Liverpool, England, he paid a short visit to his mother's brothers, who resided in New Hampshire. He arrived in England July 26th. At the time, his cousin, President Joseph F. Smith, was presiding over the European mission and assigned him to labor as a traveling elder in the Birmingham Conference under the direction of Elder Richard V. Morris. While upon this mission, he visited most of the conferences in Great Britain, and also in company with President Joseph F. Smith, Elder F. M. Lyman, and others, visited Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, and France. Okay. Now, they mentioned that Elder Lyman visited those places, and I don't remember if they specifically mentioned Joseph F. Smith visited those places, but I didn't know they were accompanied by John Henry Smith, who was quite young at the time, yeah? Born in 1838, and this was in 1872. Okay, he wasn't that young. 35? Anyways, I didn't realize that they're calling him his cousin. Joseph F. Smith was solidly his second cousin. Okay, so here's the connection. So, John Smith was the brother of Joseph Smith Sr., yes? And then his son, so John Smith's son, George A. Smith, was then first cousins to Hiram Smith, who was the son of Joseph Smith Sr., yes? So they were first cousins. George A. Smith and Hiram Smith were first cousins. So then George A. Smith's son, John Henry Smith, was second cousins to Hiram's son, Joseph F. Smith. Yeah, they were second cousins. So it's funny to me that they're mentioning them as cousins. I guess they just want to remind everybody that they're related, I guess, but they weren't as closely related as some people think they were. All right. On account of his father's sickness, he was called home a year after his arrival in England and reached Salt Lake City in time to spend some 15 days at his father's bedside previous to the latter's death, which occurred September 1st, 1875. Yeah, it was relatively sudden. Relatively. I think they had like 2-3 months notice, but they didn't know he was dying until he was really dying, yeah? On the 22nd of November of this same year, he was called and set apart as Bishop of the 17th Ward of Salt Lake City. This position he filled for nearly 5 years. During this period, he was employed by the Utah Central Railway Company. At the General Conference of the Church, held October 1880, there was a reorganization of the First Presidency of the Church, and at that time, elders Francis M. Lyman and John Henry Smith were called to fill vacancies in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. These two brethren were ordained apostles on the 27th of that same month, just before their ordination. Elder Smith felt a desire to receive a testimony or manifestation that his call to the apostleship was from the Lord. To satisfy this desire, he then and there offered a silent prayer, asking that, if such were the case, it might fall to the lot of President Wilford Woodruff to ordain him to that calling. He said nothing about this to any of the brethren present, nor did he know then who would ordain him. It transpired, however, that President Woodruff was chosen to be the mouth in his ordination, and he accepted this fact as a direct answer to his prayer and an evidence that the Lord had chosen him. That's really sweet. I like that. I think that this is something that a lot of people don't do because they don't think it's their choice, their place, or whatever, to ask for a sign. But if it's just something small and relatively insignificant, then you're allowed to ask for something, just, a little Easter egg for yourself. And in this case, all he wanted was President Wilford Woodruff to ordain him. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I do appreciate that will really strengthen his testimony of his calling. The early part of 1882, when the Edmunds anti-polygamy bill was before Congress, apostles John Henry Smith and Moses Thatcher were sent to Washington to labor in connection with Utah's delegate Honorable George Q. Cannon to prevent the passage of that bill. Upon 2 subsequent occasions, Apostle Smith had been sent to Washington in the interest of the people of Utah. In 1892, he went to the capital to labor for the admission of Utah as a state, and in the early part of the present year he went there to aid in modifying the sentiments of leading men in regard to the Latter-day Saints. So is he good at that, or is this just something that they asked him to do? In October 1882, Apostle Smith was called to preside over the European mission. While upon this mission, he visited the various conferences of that land and also traveled some in France and Italy. He was absent from home upon this occasion for 29 months. Just over 2 years, At the time of his return, arrests and prosecutions under the Edmunds anti-polygamy law were being vigorously carried on. He was arrested upon the prevailing charge, that of unlawful cohabitation, but was discharged on account of lack of evidence. Interesting! How do you have lack of evidence for unlawful cohabitation? I think that's a ridiculous charge anyway. Unlawful cohabitation. You're not allowed to live with somebody else, I think that's a weird law, but hey, I didn't write it. Discharged on lack of evidence. I felt like that would be something that would be really easy to prove. It surprises me that anybody was acquitted on lack of evidence. That's interesting. Besides attending to his ecclesiastical duties, Apostle Smith has figured prominently in the public affairs of the state. In February 1876, he was elected a member of the Salt Lake City Council. Being re-elected twice, he served for 6 years in that capacity of a councilman. When did he have time? Geez. In August 1881, he was elected a member of the territorial legislature. When the People's Party and liberals divided upon national political lines, he was one of the first and foremost in advocating the principles of republicanism in the territory, and ever since he has been an active Republican in politics. He was president of the convention that formed the Constitution under which Utah was admitted as a state of the Union. Since his call to the apostleship, Elder Smith has devoted practically the whole of his time to public duties, except at times when upon missions abroad he has traveled almost constantly among the stakes of Zion, attending conferences, instructing and encouraging the saints, organizing and setting in order stakes and wards, etc. He has visited every stake of Zion, and many of them several times over. In 1899, he has also made a tour of the Southern States Mission, doing considerable preaching on the way. Yeah, he's kind of like I want to travel around and testify to as many people as possible kind of a person, yeah? I think that's pretty cool. It just reminds me of Alma the Younger, oh, that I were an angel and I could have the wish of my heart, that I might go forth and speak with the trump of God, with a voice to shake the earth. It just sounds kind of like that, I want to tell everybody who ever lived that I know that Jesus is the Christ, A number of times he has attended as a delegate the sessions of the Irrigation and the Trans-Mississippi Congresses. The last Trans-Mississippi Congress was held in Houston, Texas in April 1900. After its adjournment, he went with President George Buchanan and others to the city of Mexico. This visit was of deep interest to him, and he was much impressed with what he witnessed in our sister republic. His time being so devoted to public affairs, Apostle Smith is not engaged personally in any great extent in business enterprises, though he has ability in that line, and is connected with a number of the leading business institutions of the state, as an officer or director. By nature and training, he is most eminently qualified for public duties. He has a good knowledge of human character and an extensive acquaintance with prominent men, not only in his own state but throughout the nation. These qualifications, and above all his remarkable faculty for making friends wherever he goes, fit him admirably for the position and labors that have fallen to his lot. I didn't know he was so charismatic. That's kind of cool. The character of John Henry Smith is a fine study for every young man, and from it one can gain valuable lessons. It requires no very close acquaintance to understand his disposition, for in it there is no element of deceit or artfulness. The motives by which he is actuated may be read in his open countenance and easy, natural, and unassuming manner. He is straightforward in all his actions, never being guilty of any double-dealing, and is always outspoken and candid in expressing his sentiments. He possesses courage of the highest type, a fearlessness born of the assurance that he is in the right. These qualities impress all people with whom he comes in contact, that he is sincere in his convictions whether or not they agree with his ideas. He is of a happy disposition, always hopeful, and he takes the most cheerful view of conditions that may confront him, no matter how discouraging the aspect may be. He is quick to discern and appreciate the good qualities of others, and is ever thoughtful regarding their welfare, and is broad-minded in his views. He possesses the same good qualities of heart and as of mind, and he is liberal almost to a fault. By his continued upright course in life he has established a credit for integrity and honesty, without which no man can expect to gain and retain the confidence of his fellows, no matter how brilliant his other attainments may be. As a public speaker, Apostle Smith is convincing, forceful, and eloquent. His eloquence is that of sincere earnestness. In private conversation he displays the same earnestness and is always interesting and entertaining. But the great secret of his influence with mankind is his love for them, the power that some men, more than others, seem to possess and exert over their fellows, frequently even against the will of the latter, is sometimes called personal magnetism. The force of attraction possessed by Apostle Smith is nothing less than the magnetism of pure love for humanity. Edwin F. Parry. Interesting. I found that very fascinating because I don't feel like there's that many major accomplishments you can point to and say, hey, look, this person is amazing. Look at all the things that they did. Like there are with some of the other ones that we've read. But there is quite a bit of things that he did do. And also I feel like his straight up character was very strong, was very positive, that he was very well liked, that a lot of people understood what he was trying to do, and that he really loved people. I feel like that is a really nice, effigy of someone who is a good person, just a straight up good person. So let's get a few more statistics on John Henry Smith. Born 1848, called to the Quorum of the 12 in 1880, and this was in the future still. However, he was in the first presidency as second counselor under Joseph F. Smith, and he was called in April 1910, and he died October 1911. So he wasn't in the first presidency very long before he passed away. Interesting. I found that very, very interesting. And I feel silly because I have done some more research on him, And because I did this for the other person that I looked up, let me just read my conclusion that I came to about John Henry Smith. So, yeah, this is from my own research, and this is something that I wrote a few years ago. So, conclusion. What kind of a man was Elder John Henry Smith? He was a man of unquestioning faith. He was contented to live where he was. He was obedient to every call he received. He was humble and teachable, even childlike. He loved people and wanted them to enjoy the blessings of the gospel that he enjoyed. He was truly a man of the people and worked with them all the days of his life. In his day, many laws needed to be changed, and he rolled up his sleeves and had a hand in changing them to what they are today. He was a tireless worker, a loyal friend, a forgiving man. He had faith not only in God, but also in his fellow man. He was constantly friendly and kind to all around him, and valued the individual more than any worldly goods that could be obtained on earth. He felt called to be a leader not only in the church, but also in politics, and did his best to step up to the expectations laid upon him. He was a man anyone could be proud to emulate. And I think that John Henry Smith would appreciate those words about him. Also, I like to pick out a scripture that I feel like encapsulates kind of the life, and the one I chose for him was 1 Thessalonians 5:8, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for an helmet the hope of salvation. Yeah, and he was called as an apostle by age 32. I miscalculated his age earlier, so he was in his 20s when he was on his mission. Anyways, if you want to read it, go ahead. I wrote it like 10 years ago, so I don't remember all the details. That's why I couldn't remember that many details about his life. But it is really, really interesting to, to read more about John Henry Smith, and just to try and help others not forget about him. Yeah, like that's kind of my big goal. This particular article is not super long about him, but compared to the other ones that we've read so far, but it does have some good information, yeah? And he looks a lot like his father, in my opinion. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this today. If you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.